Hi, I'm Dave Atkinson, and welcome to Life on the Strait. We ventured from the northern Bay Area of California to a 16-day stay in the southern Bay Area, where several day trips take us out to the coast. It was here that we stumbled upon a huge oversight. That would be going without a gray water treatment solution. Aside from that, the South Bay Area was the perfect home base for us, as there was so much to see. In fact, there was so much to see that this episode will only cover the first half of the chapter. Thank you for following Life on the Strait. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe to this channel, which is free, and like and share as well. We pulled up stakes the next morning and departed towards the town of Gilroy, the garlic capital of America. Fittingly, the campground we would call home for the next 16 days was called Gilroy Garlic USA RV Park. The 120-mile drive did not go all that smooth. We wanted to avoid traveling through the heart of Oakland, so we headed east like we had done during our trips to Vacaville. This time, rather than merge onto Interstate 80, we dropped down onto Curtola Parkway as it made its way through Vallejo. The parkway transitions into Interstate 780, but we took the wrong road and had to drive for a bit before I found a big parking lot from which to turn back. Interstate 780 is less than 7 miles long, and it merges into Interstate 680, which was a mixed bag as far as freeways go. Now would be a good time to go over some of the tips that I learned when driving a rig as big as our motorhome. When on a 2-lane freeway, I'm always in the slow lane, the right-hand lane, but when there are 3 or more lanes, I try and stay 1 lane over from the slow lane. I do that because people generally do not know how to merge. A big motorhome pulling a car doesn't do anything quickly. G2 doesn't accelerate fast, and she doesn't stop fast. When I see a vehicle trying to merge on the freeway to my right, I always adjust my speed to give them space to accelerate and slide over in front of me. It's amazing how often that courtesy results in a dance such as this. I slow down, and the approaching vehicle also slows down. I slow down even more, and the now close to merging vehicle slows down even more. I then think screw it and speed up, thinking that they will now have to wait their turn to fall in behind me. They in turn step on the gas and barely squeeze in front of me, flagging me off as they go by. G2 is over 8.5 feet wide, and she pretty much takes up the entire lane. When a pothole appears and I am in the slow lane, I might have at least a little room to move over onto the shoulder pavement to avoid the pothole. However, when I am 1 lane to the left of the slow lane and the freeway is packed with cars on both sides, all I can do is hit the pothole directly and hope that it doesn't blow out a tire. That was the condition of Interstate 680 all the way south to Fremont when the quality of pavement went up by an order of magnitude. At San Jose, Interstate 680 meets up with US 101, and it was smooth sailing south to Gilroy. As there was a Costco in Gilroy, I took us directly to the gas pumps first to get G2 filled up, and then we headed over to our nearby campground. Gilroy Garlic USA RV Park was a quality campground. Of its 176 campsites, only 32 were for travelers staying for less than a month. They were a premium price campground, so the long-termers weren't the same motley crew that we saw back in Novato. Excuse me. We spoke with a couple of guys in a trailer next to us, and they told us that they were construction workers on a big project in San Jose. Traveling nurses were also frequent RV park customers. As two people who had always worked in or near the same city that they lived in, it was an eye-opener for us to learn about such a large group of people moving around the country, going from one job to the next. Gilroy was the perfect location from which to spread out in all directions and go sightseeing. If you've wondered up to now how we discovered some of the places that we went to, our secret was the TripAdvisor website. You can enter a city or region and then search for things to do, and up comes a list, often several pages long, of attractions rated by TripAdvisor users. You can find out everything there is to see about the attraction: location, price, if any, photos, you name it. This was a task that I enjoyed doing, and I'd construct a list of things to do and see well in advance of reserving a campsite. That's why we were staying in Gilroy for 16 days. I found a ton of stuff that I thought would be fun for us to see. While I had been a user of TripAdvisor almost from the start of our trip, it didn't occur to me that I could, or should, contribute my ratings to the attractions that we visited. I later wised up and started leaving reviews, and according to their website, it looks like I made 109 contributions. Our first venture out was on the 27th as we headed west to Santa Cruz, which was less than 50 miles away. Neither of us had been here before, and we were charmed by this spotless little city. We headed to Natural Bridges State Park, named for a few rocky islands just offshore where erosion had created a bridge-like look to them. A little like what we observed in Coos Bay, the area where land meets ocean was really interesting, with what looked like limestone rock channeled and pocketed by erosion, making for some very interesting and varied patterns. The bird life in this area was a treat to behold. Pelicans and military-like V formations were flying all over, and some were bobbing in the waves. I was able to get a great photo of a Hirman's gull as it was on the beach, as well as an egret. Off in the distance on the tops of the natural bridges were cormorants and resting pelicans, and other types of gulls and birds were flying about. In the heart of the park lies a visitor center, and right next to it begins a raised wooden walkway called the Monarch Boardwalk. We soon found out how aptly named this boardwalk was. People were with much more serious cameras than we had gathered around an area pointing up into the leafy trees. We were witnessing a monarch butterfly migration, as tens of thousands of the insects were grouped right on top of each other, as if they were in pods. Even though it was past noon, many of the butterflies hadn't yet warmed up to the point where they could fly off. Easy pickings for blue jays, which were hopping amongst the branches, gorging themselves on the butterflies. After we took all of that in for a bit, we headed off down the remainder of the boardwalk and out into some of the other trails that ran throughout the park. We returned to the visitor center, which had more information on the monarchs, as well as on other creatures that inhabited the park. The center also had a butterfly-friendly garden outside, teaching us what to grow if we wanted to attract butterflies to our yards. After we left the park, we drove around a bit looking at some of the impressive oceanfront homes in the city. We found a little brew pub called Seabright Brewery, where we had lunch and then headed back home. The following day, we headed due east on State Route 152, which later turned into State Route 33, towards the little town of Los Baños. About as far away from our campground as Santa Cruz, it felt like an entirely different world. The road climbed up about 1,000 feet as it crossed over Pacheco Pass in the Diablo Range. Descending the eastern slope, we came upon the huge San Luis Reservoir and pulled into the parking lot of its visitor center. In addition to storing water for the California State Water Project, the canals, pipelines, reservoirs, and dams that supply water to people and farmland, the reservoir was also a recreation area. Our rattlesnake situational awareness was operating at full alert thanks to numerous signs around the visitor center alerting us. Past the reservoir stretched out the San Joaquin Basin segment of the California Central Valley. Soon we were on an overpass over Interstate 5, and Los Baños was just up ahead. There really wasn't much to do in this town other than grab a Starbucks coffee and head back home, but when it came time to head south to our next destination, Bakersfield, this would be the route that we would take from Gilroy. On the way home, we pulled off in Hollister at the Casa de Fruta Orchards Complex. Much more than just a fruit stand, they had rides, a restaurant, old trucks parked outside, and a huge amount of food and other merchandise for sale. Their Tabasco spicy chocolate bars were too much for us to resist, so they became our souvenirs of this little trip. We headed off to Silicon Valley on the 29th. As a dyed-in-the-wool computer geek, this was going to be my special day. Our first stop was at the Robert N. Noyce Building, which was the home of the Intel Museum. Back in the day, Intel was to the computer business what coffee beans were to Starbucks, and now we were going to learn a little about the history of the microprocessor. I'll now switch over to Amy's take on the museum. Boring. Yeah, whatever. Yawn. As for me, I loved learning about how Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce worked together to invent a new type of computer memory as well as the all-important microprocessor. After spending close to an hour in the museum, we drove over to Apple Computer's huge campus at One Infinite Loop. That's a street address doubling as a programming terminology. I had been hoping to visit the company store, but it was closed for the holidays, so this little stop wasn't what I had hoped for. We pulled into nearby Alta Mesa Cemetery and Funeral Home, which is where Apple Computer's Steve Jobs had been buried back in October of 2011. He never wanted to have a headstone or marker of any kind, but one just cannot hide from the internet. After his private burial, someone noticed that the ground next to David and Lucille Packard's grave markers, and David was a co-founder of Hewlett-Packard and an icon to Steve Jobs, had been disturbed. And that is where people believe that Mr. Jobs was buried. When we arrived, there was an apple with a couple of wrapped-in cellophane flower arrangements laying out on the grass. Rest in peace, Steve. Several other famous people had been buried in this unassuming cemetery. We stood over the markers of Ernest Jennings Ford, a.k.a. Tennessee Ernie Ford, and his wife. Our next stop that day would be on the coast at the Pigeon Point Lighthouse State Historical Park, but on the way I got sidetracked. There at the junction of Skyline Boulevard and La Honda Road sat the legendary Alice's Restaurant, the namesake of the movie starring Arlo Guthrie. It was this rustic-looking big cabin-like structure with a large outdoor deck, which nobody was out on in coolish December. Of course, we had to go inside for lunch. Afterwards, as we headed out towards the coast, I felt obligated to pull off the road in the town of La Honda so that I could get a photo of our Honda in front of a La Honda Center sign. At the Pigeon Point Lighthouse, we were not permitted to climb to the top, so we had to be content just reading about how a Fresnel lens worked, as well as looking at the lens that was mounted to a stand on the floor, plus taking in a few other signs and exhibits. Some of the foliage outdoors was beautiful and of a type that we hadn't seen before. It was a cold and windy afternoon, so we piled back into our toasty car and completed the loop back home, driving south through Santa Cruz and back to Gilroy. That was a long 170-mile day, and we were both looking forward to some rest.